In this video, we will take a closer look at Lesson 5 from Unit 4, Use Tables and Graphs to Determine the Better Deal. You first see the list of standards that are addressed in this lesson. The standard that I want to draw your attention to is number 14, as this is new to the 2019 course of study for Math 8. This snippet is from our unit overview. As you can see, those are a list of I can statements. So when students are working through this lesson, those are the things that they should be focusing their attention on. I can use a process column to determine a pattern. I can write a function rule to describe a pattern. I can graph data points. Those are the things that we want to emphasize throughout this lesson. So when I introduce this lesson to students, the first thing I have them do is to take out two different colored pencils, because in fact they will be looking at two distinct scenarios and comparing and contrasting them. So to help them keep the scenarios straight, I have them use two different colored highlighters to kind of highlight what is related. So all of this would go with Mr. Cookie Company, and this here would go with the U.S. Cookie Company. I would have a student that could read the STEM out loud to us and then give the students an opportunity to highlight the corresponding pieces. One thing that I want the students to really make sure they're kind of processing is this process column. For those students that are having a hard time getting started on what to write in this column, I draw their attention back to this verbal scenario. And we talk about how we read left to right. So we're going to translate this verbal description into a expression, a math expression. So I would have them write 20. So 20 plus 3. And when it says each, we talk about each means that we are multiplying. So we're going to use parentheses, and here number of tubs would go inside this parentheses. And then this would be 35. And then we would repeat the process for process column 2. Some students, it's much easier for them to complete the process column and the income column for offer 1 before they tackle process column for offer 2. Here, I do have them go ahead and put the 1 and then the 5 in parentheses, just so they're seeing that it's $1 for the number of tubs that were sold. And so this would be 65. After I've modeled the first row, I have the students complete the table and then compare that with their shoulder partner. Two and 3, anytime students see a pattern in mathematics, they tend to think about it's increasing by 5s, or it's increasing by 2s, or it's going up by 15 every time. And yes, that works. However, we want them to take it deeper, and we want them to really look at the process column here. So even though it says the income, the pattern that you see for the income comes from the process column. So this is really just a interpretation of the verbal scenario from the stem. After they've answered several more questions, the students are asked to create a graph of their data. Here, you want to refer back to question number 5 when it talks about independent and dependent variable, and we can talk about how the dependent variable would be graphed on the y-axis, and the independent variable would be graphed on the x-axis. So the dependent depends on the independent. Now, instead of giving the students a blank graph and having them create the scale and show the viewing window, that has already been done for them. But this is a great opportunity to talk about, well, where did these numbers come from? So if we chose 100 to go all the way to on the x-axis, why did we choose that value? And so if we look back at the scenario and see that there were 20 students on the volleyball team, then maybe the coach has challenged each of them to sell at least 5 tubs of cookie dough. So 20 members times 5 tubs of cookie dough, that's where that 100 comes from. And then so on the y-axis would be the profit. So we want to look at each of those equations and determine what the largest value of our range should be. So students have the viewing window already filled in for them, so now their focus is more on plotting the points and then analyzing the data. Now, because we are graphing 2 sets of data on one graph, we want to use some symbols. So here we're going to use, we could use this dot for the Mr. Cookie Company. And then here, this little could be used for the U.S. Cookie Company. So that way it keeps the data. They know what point correlates to what scenario. The questions that are going to get you the biggest bang for your buck are 12 through 14. And this is really talking about understanding the concept of the initial value and the rate of change in the context of the scenario, and where that is seen in the graph and where that is seen in the equation. So in Unit 4, we try to focus more on calling it a rate of change and an initial value. In Unit 5, we will then add those algebraic terms, slope and y-intercept. So as you work through this lesson, I want you to think about how you would chunk it. Which questions would be grouped together, and why are you choosing to group those questions together?